A retired Navy SEAL thought the war had taken everything from him until his K9 vanished into the forest. Minutes later, the dog returned carrying a burned piece of a child's jacket marked with 2 mysterious initials. The next clue was even worse. A damaged harmonica once owned by the teammate Gideon had failed to bring home. As a storm closed over Hollow Creek, the K9 followed the scent of a missing boy and his injured mother. But beneath an abandoned mine, rising water was swallowing the only path to someone still alive. What Gideon found in the darkness would force him to face the past he had spent years trying to escape.
Hold that beam steady.
Where are you watching from, and
lift
what
it
will this
now.
story make you feel? Please like and
Copy that.
subscribe to help us
Lifting on
reach
3.
1,000 subscribers and keep
2.
creating more meaningful stories. The explosion came without fire at first. It arrived as pressure, a violent force that folded the night inward and erased every sound except a high metallic ringing inside Gideon Vale's skull. Dust filled his mouth. Broken stones struck his shoulders. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a man was calling his name through a damaged radio. Gideon East Wall. The voice belonged to Caleb Ward, but the transmission broke beneath another blast before the warning was complete. Gideon tried to move toward it. His legs would not answer. 4 shadows disappeared behind a wall of dust, and although he shouted until his throat burned, none of them came back. Gideon woke, with one hand locked around the knife beneath his pillow. His body was rigid, breath shallow, eyes searching corners before his mind understood where he was. No ruined building, no foreign desert, no radio screaming in the dark. Only the narrow bedroom of a timber cabin in the Wyoming mountains, washed in the gray light before dawn. At 33, Gideon still carried the disciplined athletic build of a Navy SEAL, with broad shoulders, powerful arms, and the controlled posture of a man trained never to appear uncertain. His clean-shaven face was angular and rugged, sharpened by a hard jawline and cold blue-gray eyes that rarely rested on anything for long. A neat modern undercut framed his head, the sides faded tight, and the short dark top kept carefully textured, even though there was no longer a commanding officer to inspect him. He wore the same complete green digital camouflage uniform most days, properly buttoned and fitted, with a plain black belt and polished black combat boots. It was not required anymore. Gideon told himself it was practical. The truth was that civilian clothes made him feel as though he were impersonating someone he had never learned to become. Knox sat beside the bed. The 5-year-old male Belgian Malinois was lean and muscular, built for speed rather than bulk, with a deep fawn to mahogany coat, a distinct black facial mask, and upright ears that caught every small sound in the cabin. His dark amber eyes were intense, but not restless. A tan tactical K9 vest fit closely over his chest, and a simple working dog collar circled his neck. Knox had once searched collapsed rooms, tracked men across broken ground, and remained steady while gunfire split the air. Now he watched Gideon with the quiet patience of an animal that understood panic without needing to name it. The dog did not jump onto the bed. He did not whine. Knox leaned forward and placed his head against Gideon's knee. The contact was firm enough to be real, but gentle enough not to trap him. Gideon loosened his grip on the knife. "Wyoming," he whispered. Knox's ear moved. Cabin. October. Gideon inhaled through his nose and counted 4 seconds, then released the breath slowly. The ringing faded. The room returned. Outside, wind moved through the pines surrounding the abandoned fire lookout tower above the cabin. Gideon rested one hand on Knox's head. "I'm here," he said, though he was never certain whether the words were meant for the dog or himself. His mornings followed an exact order. Gideon checked the front lock, then the rear lock, although he knew he had secured both before sleeping. He examined the windows for disturbed latches, inspected the fuel level in the generator, and walked the perimeter of the property, noting deer tracks near the woodpile and the shallow print of a fox beyond the fence. He tested the water pump, counted the cans in the pantry, and repositioned the kitchen chair so its back faced the wall, and its seat offered a clear view of both doors. He called these actions maintenance. Anyone else might have called them fear. The cabin had belonged to an elderly former ranger who moved into assisted housing after a stroke. It sat 20 minutes from town by truck and less than 4 miles from Hollow Creek by an old trail that crossed dense forest and abandoned logging land. Gideon had chosen the place because only one road approached it. He could see headlights before visitors reached the final bend. He could hear an engine long before someone stepped onto the porch. Most importantly, no one came unless they had a reason. Dr. Lena Hart came shortly after 9. Her faded utility vehicle climbed the dirt road with a soft rattle Gideon recognized before it appeared between the trees. Lena was 38, an athletic outdoor woman with an oval face, lightly weathered skin, and warm light brown eyes that noticed more than she admitted. Her shoulder-length dark blonde hair was tied into a low, practical ponytail. She wore an olive flannel shirt beneath a dark red rescue jacket, charcoal work pants, and brown hiking boots marked by years of mud and animal hair. A veterinarian in town and a volunteer with the county search and rescue team, Lena carried herself with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to frightened animals, injured hikers, and stubborn men. She had learned early that Gideon responded poorly to sympathy, so she offered him facts instead. "Knox's rear paw," she said as she stepped from the vehicle. "You said the pad was irritated. It's better." That wasn't the question. Gideon looked at her for a moment, then opened the gate. Inside the cabin, Lena knelt beside Knox and examined the thickened skin on his rear paw. Knox remained alert and steady, allowing her hands to move between his toes without pulling away. "Minor abrasion," Lena said. "Keep it clean. No long runs for 2 days." Gideon gave a non-committal grunt. Lena glanced around the nearly empty room. There were no family photographs, no souvenirs, and no decoration beyond an old wall clock. On a shelf beside the fireplace lay a framed military photograph turned face down. Lena noticed it but said nothing. Instead, she placed a paper bag on the counter. "Dog food, coffee, some bread. I can buy food. Then think of it as payment for repairing the clinic's back gate." "I didn't repair your gate," Lena smiled faintly. "Of course not." She never thanked him directly. Gideon appreciated that more than he would have admitted. As Lena closed her medical bag, Knox's entire posture changed. The dog rose without warning, ears fixed toward the northern wall. A low vibration formed in his chest. Not a bark, not quite a growl. Gideon stopped moving. "What is it?" Lena asked. Knox crossed the room and pressed his nose against the base of the door. Then he looked directly at Gideon and lifted one front paw, the old signal he used when he had located a human scent during search work. There should have been no human scent outside except Lena's and Gideon's. Gideon opened the door. Cold air entered the cabin. The yard stood empty beneath the pines, but Knox stared beyond the fence toward the northern forest, as if someone unseen had just passed between the trees. The moment broke when a branch fell somewhere in the distance. Knox relaxed slightly, though his gaze remained fixed on the woods. Lena studied the dog, then Gideon. "He doesn't usually false alert. I know. Could be a hiker. Not on that side. The public trail is west." Lena waited, perhaps expecting him to explain more, but Gideon offered nothing. She left a few minutes later, advising him again to rest Knox's paw. Gideon watched her vehicle descend the road. Before it vanished, he noticed the left rear light shaking loosely in its housing. He waited until Lena was gone, retrieved a screwdriver from the shed, and made a note to repair it the next time she came. Helping people was easier when they did not have the opportunity to thank him. The afternoon settled cold and still. Gideon split firewood behind the cabin while Knox rested near the porch. Around 3, the dog rose again. This time, Knox did not merely stare. He moved across the yard, nose lifted, muscles tight beneath the tan vest. "Knox, heel." The dog paused, but did not return. His eyes remained on the northern trees. Gideon repeated the command with more authority. Knox took 2 steps backward, torn between obedience and whatever had captured his attention. Then he turned and ran into the forest. For 1 second, Gideon could not process what he had seen. Knox had never abandoned a command without immediate danger. Gideon dropped the axe, entered the cabin, and retrieved a field radio, flashlight, medical pouch, and weatherproof jacket. He did not take a weapon. There had been no gunfire, no cry for help, only Knox's inexplicable departure, but his body responded as if a team member had disappeared beyond enemy lines. By the time Gideon reached the edge of the yard, the forest had swallowed every trace of the dog. "Knox!" His voice carried through the trees and returned empty. Gideon stepped over the fence and followed the disturbed needles on the ground. The old training sharpened his senses. A snapped fern, damp soil compressed by paws, a faint scrape where the dog had crossed a fallen log. Gideon moved quickly, but controlled his breathing. He told himself Knox had detected a deer, although both of them knew the dog would not break command for wildlife. 40 minutes later, movement appeared between the pines. Knox emerged at a steady trot. His chest rose rapidly, and mud darkened his lower legs, but he showed no sign of injury. Something blue hung from his mouth. Gideon stopped. "Drop." Knox approached, but did not immediately obey. The dog looked back over his shoulder, then placed the object at Gideon's boots. It was a torn piece of blue fabric, burned black along one edge and stained with reddish mud. A small embroidered star remained visible near the center. Gideon crouched without touching it at first. The cloth carried the stale odor of old smoke, wet earth, and something sharp beneath both antiseptic. Knox whined and turned toward the trees again. "Where did you find this?" Gideon asked, already aware the dog could not answer. Knox stepped forward, then looked back, inviting him to follow. Gideon examined the fabric more closely. On the reverse side, written in black marker, were two letters, E.W. The initials meant nothing to him, yet something about the burned edge tightened the muscles in his chest. He remembered cloth, smoldering beneath desert rubble. He remembered pulling a torn sleeve from a collapsed doorway and realizing the arm inside it no longer belonged to anyone living. Gideon forced the memory down. This was Wyoming. This was a piece of a child's jacket. Nothing more had been proven. He photographed the cloth and called Lena. She returned before sunset, her expression becoming serious when she saw the embroidered star. "The elementary school uses this emblem," she said. "They gave blue jackets to students for the museum trip last week. Could someone have thrown it away? Maybe, but not out here." She turned the fabric over and read the initials. "I'll ask around discreetly." Gideon noticed her loose rear light while she spoke. Without comment, he crouched beside the vehicle and tightened the housing. Lena watched him, but did not interrupt. "You fix things when you're worried," she said. Gideon stood. "Your light was unsafe." That wasn't a denial. He handed her the screwdriver and walked back toward Knox. Night descended quickly. The forest became a wall of black shapes beyond the windows. Knox refused his usual place near the stove and stood instead at the rear door, facing north. Every few minutes, his ears shifted, as though tracking a sound too distant for Gideon to hear. Gideon placed the cloth in a sealed bag on the table. He tried to eat, but found himself staring at the initials, E.W. He searched his memory for names, missions, casualty lists, and families he had avoided after returning home. Nothing came. At midnight, Knox scratched the door once. Gideon opened it and found only darkness, cold wind, and the whisper of pine branches. "Not tonight," he told the dog. Knox did not move for several seconds, then reluctantly stepped back. At first light, Knox led Gideon to the northern edge of the property. The dog worked slowly because of the irritated paw, nose moving close to the ground. Near a fallen pine, he stopped beside a small metallic object, half buried beneath wet needles. Gideon pulled on a pair of disposable medical gloves and lifted it. A harmonica. One side had been burned. The metal was corroded, but a series of shallow marks remained visible near the end plate, 3 short lines crossed by one longer stroke. Gideon's fingers went cold. Caleb Ward had carved that exact mark into everything he carried: canteens, ammunition boxes, notebooks, and the harmonica he played during quiet nights overseas. Caleb had called it his lucky mark. After the explosion, Gideon had searched the rubble for that harmonica and never found it. He carried the object back to the cabin without speaking. Knox followed close beside him, no longer pulling ahead. Inside, Gideon knelt before an old military trunk he had not opened in more than 2 years. The locks resisted, then released with a dull snap. Beneath folded uniforms and sealed documents lay a photograph of 6 Navy SEALs standing beneath a merciless sun. Gideon was younger, his expression controlled even then. Beside him stood Caleb Ward, 32 at the time, athletic and square-faced, with warm green eyes, short sandy brown hair, and a neatly trimmed beard. Caleb wore the same green digital camouflage uniform as the rest of the team, but his broad smile made him look less like a warrior than a man already imagining the family he planned to return to. Gideon placed the photograph on the floor. Knox approached, sniffed Caleb's image, and released a soft, wounded sound. Gideon had heard only once before at the military airfield, when Caleb's empty equipment case had been returned. The harmonica lay between them. For 7 years, Gideon had believed the past was behind him because he had buried it deeply enough. Now, Knox had carried part of it home. The photograph remained on the cabin floor long after the morning light had reached the windows. Gideon Vale sat beside the open military trunk with the burned harmonica resting across his palm. Knox stood close enough that the Belgian Malinois' shoulder touched Gideon's knee, but the dog did not look at him. His upright ears remained angled toward the northern forest, and his dark amber eyes held the focused stillness Gideon remembered from active search operations. The mark carved into the instrument was unmistakable, 3 short lines crossed by 1 longer stroke. Caleb Ward had scratched that symbol into nearly everything he owned, claiming it kept lost things from staying lost. Gideon had once mocked him for it. Now the memory felt less like a joke and more like a hand reaching through 7 years of silence. He turned the harmonica over, searching for a manufacturer's number. A name or any detail that could prove the resemblance meant nothing. Fire had blackened one side and warped the metal cover, but the carved mark remained visible. Gideon placed it beside the blue fabric marked EW. He wanted coincidence. Coincidence was clean. It did not demand action, forgiveness, or explanations. Knox lowered his nose to the harmonica, inhaled once, and looked toward the door. Lena Hart answered Gideon's call on the 3rd ring. He did not tell her about the nightmares or the way Knox had reacted to Caleb's photograph. He gave her only the useful details. "I need the name of the student connected to those initials." Lena was silent for a moment. "I can ask someone at the school, but I'm not handing you a child's private information without a reason." Gideon looked at the burned harmonica. "I have a reason." Something in his voice must have reached her because she stopped arguing. 20 minutes later, she called back. "There's a boy named Eli Ward, 9 years old. He was on the museum trip last week." Gideon's grip tightened around the phone. "Ward?" "Yes. Has he been in school?" "Not yesterday or today. The office says his mother didn't call." Lena paused. "Gideon, do you know them?" "I knew his father." The answer sounded inadequate even to him. Caleb had not been merely someone Gideon knew. He had been the man who could make exhausted operators laugh after 20 hours without sleep, the one who played the same 4 notes on a harmonica until the entire team threatened to bury it. Caleb had spoken often of Mara, though at the time she had been a woman in photographs and letters, not yet his wife. Gideon remembered one photograph in particular, a slender young woman with chestnut hair standing beside a river, smiling as if she had never doubted Caleb would return. Gideon had stopped opening messages from military families after the funeral. He had not known there was a child. Lena arrived at the cabin before noon. She brought no medical bag this time, only a folder and a worried expression. "Mara Ward works at the county museum," she said. 35 years old, records restoration. She missed work yesterday and today. Lena had learned this through a friend at the museum, not through official channels. Mara's co-workers assumed she and Eli had gone to visit relatives, but Mara had left unfinished restoration work on her desk and had failed to attend a scheduled preservation meeting. Her phone went directly to voicemail. Gideon placed the harmonica in front of Lena. Caleb carried one like this. She examined the carved lines. Could someone else have found it? Yes. Could Eli have had his father's things? Gideon looked at the initials on the cloth. Yes. Neither possibility made the situation less troubling. A county vehicle climbed the road an hour later. Sheriff Daniel Rourke stepped out wearing a tan uniform shirt, dark brown trousers, a black duty belt, and polished black boots. At 52, Rourke had a large, solid build and the controlled movements of a man who conserved energy until it mattered. His broad face was marked by years of wind and responsibility, with deep blue eyes, short salt and pepper hair, and a neatly groomed gray mustache. He had served in the Marine Corps before entering law enforcement, though he rarely mentioned it. Military service had made him sympathetic to damaged veterans, but suspicious of men who believed their past training placed them above procedure. He greeted Lena with a nod, then studied Gideon's complete green digital camouflage uniform without commenting on it. "You reported property belonging to a missing child," Rourke said. "We reported objects that may belong to one," Gideon corrected. Rourke's expression barely changed. Good. You understand the difference. Inside, Rourke photographed the fabric and harmonica before placing each in a separate evidence bag. Gideon disliked watching Caleb's instrument leave his hand, but he understood the necessity. Rourke explained that Mara's vehicle had been recorded by a traffic camera traveling north toward Hollow Creek 2 afternoons earlier. No camera had captured it returning. There had been no formal missing person report because Mara had few local relatives and her employer had only become concerned that morning. This is enough to start checking routes and contacting hospitals, Rourke said. It is not enough to decide they were attacked, abducted, or lost in the woods. The boy left a marked piece of clothing near my property. Or someone carried it there. Or an animal dragged it. We follow evidence, not the most dramatic explanation. Gideon felt the old resistance rising in him. During operations, hesitation had a cost, yet he also remembered the mission in which urgency, incomplete intelligence, and authority had formed a deadly combination. He forced himself to step back. What do you need? Rourke looked mildly surprised. For now, stay available. Don't contaminate any more ground. I'm requesting search and rescue support. Knox had been lying beside the door, but as Rourke spoke, the dog lifted his head. His nose moved once toward the evidence bag containing the blue fabric, then toward the forest. Gideon clipped a lead to the working dog collar. He found the first 2 objects. Let him check the immediate perimeter. Rourke considered refusing. Lena intervened. Knox is trained for human scent. Keep the area small and documented. The sheriff finally nodded. Within sight of the cabin. Nothing beyond that until the search lead arrives. Knox moved with immediate purpose. His tan vest brushed against the high grass as he crossed the yard and entered the first line of trees. Gideon followed on the lead, while Lena and Rourke marked their route. The dog ignored deer tracks, old food smells, and Gideon's usual path to the woodpile. After several minutes, Knox stopped beside a thorn bush and pawed once at the soil. A dark plastic button lay beneath wet pine needles. It was too small for an adult coat and had a strip of blue thread still attached. Several feet farther on, Gideon found the faint impression of a child-sized hiking shoe. Rain had softened the edges, but the direction was clear, south toward the cabin, then back north again. On a low branch hung a narrow strip of blue fabric tied in a clumsy knot. Not dragged by an animal, Gideon said. Rourke crouched without touching the strip. Looks deliberately placed. Before anyone could move closer, Knox abandoned the button and pulled sharply toward a fallen tree. He circled the trunk, stopped and stared at a patch of empty ground. Then he lowered himself into a rigid search position and released one quiet whine. Gideon recognized the behavior immediately. It was not how Knox marked an object. It was how he marked the last strong point of a human scent before a trail was broken. Gideon knelt and brushed aside the damp needles. Beneath them was a tiny crescent-shaped impression where someone had rested a knee, and beside it, 4 shallow lines drawn into the mud by a child's fingers. 3 short, 1 long. Caleb's mark. For one irrational second, Gideon felt as though his dead friend had reached through the boy's hand and left him a message. Keep looking. The search and rescue truck arrived early that afternoon. Owen Mercer climbed down from the driver's side. At 46, Owen was broad-shouldered and sturdy, with a square, weathered face, sun-darkened skin, and dark brown eyes that assessed terrain before people. His short brown hair had begun to gray at the temples, and a neatly trimmed brown and gray beard sharpened his already serious features. He wore a burnt-orange rescue jacket over a dark gray work shirt, olive cargo pants, and black rescue boots. 15 years as a ranger had taught him that mountains punished confidence more quickly than ignorance. He was not unfriendly, but every sentence sounded as if it had already been weighed for usefulness. "Your Vale?" he asked. "Yes." "Former SEAL?" "Yes." Owen looked at Knox. "And the dog?" "Trained Search K9. "Good. That makes him useful. It doesn't make either of you in charge." Gideon's jaw tightened. Owen noticed, but did not retreat. He unfolded a topographic map across the hood of the truck and explained that Hollow Creek contained unstable logging roads, old drainage cuts, and several undocumented mine openings. Rain was forecast by the following evening. "We divide the area before anyone runs blindly after a scent," Owen said. "Your experience matters. So does mine." Gideon looked toward the forest where the blue strip remained on the branch. Part of him wanted to take Knox and move before daylight disappeared. Another part remembered Caleb's final radio transmission, broken by an operation launched before every risk had been understood. "Fine," he said. "We do it your way." While Owen organized an initial grid, Lena examined the mud on the button and the cloth. Its red mineral staining matched soil commonly found closer to Hollow Creek rather than around Gideon's cabin. The child had likely come from the north, reached within a mile of the property, then turned back. "Why wouldn't he come all the way?" Lena asked. Gideon studied the faint tracks. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he thought he was being followed. Or he realized his mother wasn't behind him. The last possibility settled heavily over them. Rourke contacted the elementary school and obtained a description of Eli Ward, 9 years old, small for his age, curly dark brown hair, blue-gray eyes, and a blue school jacket bearing the star emblem. He was known as quiet and observant, often carrying a sketchbook. The museum provided a recent photograph of Mara. She had a slender build, fair skin with light freckles, and shoulder-length chestnut hair usually tied low at the nape. Co-workers described her as calm, meticulous, and persistent, the kind of woman who would spend hours repairing a torn document rather than discard it. Gideon stared at the image on Rourke's phone. The young woman beside the river had aged into someone stronger and more tired, but he recognized her immediately. As the others worked, Gideon returned to the cabin to retrieve water and spare tracking equipment. The empty military trunk remained open on the floor. He almost closed it without looking, but Knox entered behind him and stood beside the table where the harmonica had been examined. Gideon remembered the warped end cover. Something about it had seemed loose. Rourke had temporarily returned the instrument after documenting it because its direct connection to a crime had not been established. Gideon put on gloves and carefully slid the damaged cover free. Inside, caught behind the reed plate, was a tightly rolled scrap of paper. The ink had bled from moisture. Gideon used tweezers to unfold it on a clean towel. Only one line remained legible. "Mr. Vale, Mom said Dad trusted you." Lena read it over Gideon's shoulder. Owen stood in the doorway, his practical expression giving way to something quieter. Rourke photographed the note and immediately upgraded the case. Eli had not wandered near Gideon's cabin by chance. He had deliberately carried his father's harmonica and tried to reach the man named in the message. "Why would Mara bring the boy up here?" Rourke asked. Gideon looked at Caleb's photograph. "Maybe she wanted to give me something. Maybe she needed help." The words cut more deeply than he expected. Someone had needed him, and he had spent 2 days sitting beneath the watchtower, guarding an empty cabin from ghosts. Owen divided the search into 3 teams. One would inspect the road and likely vehicle locations. Another would check the creek and low ground. Gideon and Knox would accompany Owen's medical specialist along the old trail toward the abandoned ranger station where the child's route appeared to lead. Gideon did not protest the supervision. The discovery of the note had changed the search from a disturbing possibility into a direct request. At the northern trailhead, Knox sniffed the blue button through the evidence mesh, then lifted his head. His body became still, every muscle aligned toward Hollow Creek. The forest ahead looked dark even in the afternoon, its pines packed tightly around the narrowing path. Gideon clipped the longer tracking line to Knox's collar. He looked once at Owen, who gave a measured nod. For 7 years, Gideon had avoided every road that might lead back to Caleb Ward. Now Caleb's son had left one for him. Gideon lowered his hand beside Knox's face and gave the command, "Track." Knox entered the Hollow Creek Trail at a controlled pull. The long tracking line stretched between his working dog collar and Gideon Vale's gloved hand. The Belgian Malinois moved with his nose low, and his lean mahogany body angled into the cold wind, ignoring the old deer trails that crossed the path. His black facial mask made his expression appear severe, but Gideon recognized the small details beneath it, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the precise movement of his upright ears, and the occasional pause when the scent shifted across wet ground. Behind them walked Tessa Monroe, the medical specialist assigned to their search team. At 31, Tessa had a compact athletic build, warm, medium brown skin, and a softly rounded face that made her appear gentler than the difficult work she performed. Her naturally curly black hair was secured in a low bun beneath the hood of her Navy rescue jacket. Dark brown eyes moved constantly between Knox, the trees, and the trail ahead. She wore a gray shirt, black cargo pants, and heavy rescue boots, carrying a medical pack large enough to handle dehydration, fractures, or a severe asthma attack. Tessa had worked county emergencies for 7 years, and a childhood spent caring for a younger brother with panic disorder had taught her that frightened children did not always answer questions simply because adults needed information. "Don't rush him if we find him," she had told Gideon before they entered the forest. "A scared child can hide from rescuers as easily as from danger." Gideon had nodded. He knew the same was true of wounded soldiers. The morning sky had darkened faster than expected. Clouds pressed low over the mountains, draining the color from the pine forest and covering the trail in a gray-green light. Owen Mercer's voice came through the radio every 15 minutes, confirming the locations of the 3 search teams. One group followed the road north, checking pullouts and slopes for Mara's vehicle. Another searched low ground near the creek. Gideon, Tessa, and Knox followed the route suggested by Eli's fabric markers toward an abandoned ranger station nearly 5 miles beyond the main road. The wind carried the smell of damp bark and distant rain. Gideon studied every broken branch and patch of mud. He did not need to lead the team to feel responsible for what happened inside it. Knox stopped after 40 minutes beside a young pine. A narrow strip of blue fabric had been tied around a low branch. The knot was uneven, pulled tight by small fingers. Gideon photographed it and marked the coordinates before allowing Knox to continue. Several hundred yards farther, the dog found an empty plastic water bottle placed upright on a flat stone. It had not been thrown aside. Someone had chosen a visible surface and balanced it there. "He's marking his route," Tessa said. "Or trying to," Gideon replied. The bottle was small, the kind sold in school lunch packs. A faint, muddy handprint covered one side. Tessa crouched and examined the ground without touching it. One child. No clear adult prints here. Gideon looked back along the trail. If Eli had been alone at this point, Mara had either sent him ahead or become separated from him earlier. The trail descended into an area burned by wildfire years before. Blackened trunks stood among younger pines, and every gust stirred the dry remains of old ash beneath the new growth. Knox slowed as the ground became uneven. He passed a narrow drainage ditch, doubled back, and placed one paw against a scarred tree. A rough arrow had been drawn on the bark with charcoal, pointing east toward the ranger station. The line was shaky but unmistakable. Below it, footprints showed that Eli had first traveled west, then returned and changed direction. Gideon followed the western track for several yards until it ended at a fresh slide of loose soil and stones. A section of the old path had collapsed into the ravine. "He tried to go back," Gideon said. "Back to his mother," Tessa replied. The realization altered the silence between them. Eli had not abandoned Mara. He had been forced away from her. They found the backpack near a shallow stream shortly before noon. Knox alerted beside a cluster of rocks where one shoulder strap had caught beneath a branch. The small blue pack was soaked along the bottom but still closed. Gideon did not open it until Tessa had photographed its position and Owen approved over the radio. Inside were 2 crushed packets of crackers, an inhaler, a child's drawing notebook, a compact battery pack, and a mobile phone protected in a clear plastic case. The phone belonged to Mara Ward. Her identification card was tucked behind it. The device would not turn on. "Battery's dead," Tessa said. She checked the inhaler and frowned. "This is a rescue inhaler. If Eli has asthma, he's been without it since he lost the bag." Gideon's eyes moved toward the rising trail. "How long can he manage?" "Depends on the child and what triggers him. Cold, fear, and exertion won't help." She placed the inhaler in an accessible pocket. "Finding him just became more urgent. Panicking won't make us faster." Knox sniffed the backpack, then followed the bank upstream. His pace increased. Gideon shortened the tracking line before the dog could pull too far ahead. The old ranger station appeared through the trees an hour later, a single-story timber building with a sagging porch and a rusted antenna leaning from the roof. Several windows had been boarded after vandals damaged the place, but the front door stood slightly open. No smoke rose from the chimney. No movement showed behind the glass. Gideon raised one hand, signaling Tessa to stop. He listened. Wind pushed a loose gutter against the roof with a faint metallic knock. Somewhere inside, Wood creaked. Knox approached the porch but did not cross the threshold. His nostrils widened. Instead of barking, he moved along the front wall and stopped beside a side door leading to a storage room. He lowered himself to the ground and looked at Gideon. It was a passive alert. Human scent located, no immediate threat identified. Gideon felt something inside his chest pull tight. They had found someone. Before Gideon could reach the door, the loose gutter struck the roof again. A sharp metallic bang cut through the stillness. From inside the storage room came a sudden scrape, followed by the sound of something wooden falling to the floor. Knox's ears flattened for half a second. Then the dog did something Gideon had never seen him do during an active search. He removed himself from Gideon's side, walked to the closed door, and lay down with his back facing it. Knox deliberately exposed the vulnerable line of his spine to whoever was hiding inside. The message was not supernatural, but it felt almost sacred in its simplicity. There was no threat here, only someone who needed to believe he was safe. Gideon stepped onto the porch slowly. "Eli," he called, keeping his voice low. "My name is Gideon Vale. Your mother told you to find me." No answer came. Tessa remained several steps behind to avoid crowding the entrance. Gideon unfastened the knife at his belt, placed it on the porch, and set his radio beside it. He removed his medical pouch and lowered himself to sit against the opposite wall. "I'm not coming inside," he said. "Knox is here. You can see him before you see me." The storage door opened less than an inch. A large blue-gray eye appeared in the gap, then vanished. Gideon did not move. After several seconds, the door opened wider. Eli Ward stood in the shadows with a broken wooden handle clutched in both hands. He was 9 years old but small for his age, with a slender frame and a round, youthful face gone pale from cold and exhaustion. His medium-length dark brown hair curled untidily around his forehead. Large blue-gray eyes shifted from Gideon to Tessa and finally to Knox. Eli wore a blue school jacket marked with a small star emblem on the left chest, though one section had been torn from the sleeve. Beneath it was a cream shirt, taupe gray cargo pants, and black hiking shoes caked with mud. His lower lip trembled, but he did not cry. Fear had pulled every muscle in his body inward. Tessa crouched where Eli could see her hands. "My name is Tessa. I help people who get hurt or sick." Eli tightened his grip on the wooden handle. "You don't have to talk," she continued. "You can nod. You can point. You can do nothing until you're ready." Gideon recognized the technique. Give choices. Restore control. Knox turned his head just enough to look at the boy without rising. Eli's attention settled on the tan tactical vest and the dog's dark amber eyes. "That's Knox," Gideon said. "He found your jacket. He found your dad's harmonica." Eli's grip loosened slightly. Gideon reached slowly into an outer pocket and displayed the evidence photograph Rourke had given him, not the instrument itself. "You left this for me?" Eli gave the smallest nod. "Is your mother Mara?" Another nod. "Is she hurt?" The boy's breath became uneven. His eyes darted toward the woods behind the building. Tessa noticed immediately. "Eli, look at Knox," she said. "Watch him breathe." Knox's chest rose slowly, then fell. Tessa matched the rhythm with one hand. In. Out. "You don't have to say anything yet." Eli attempted the pattern. His next breath came easier. Tessa moved closer only after Eli lowered the wooden handle. She checked his pulse, temperature, and breathing while explaining every action before touching him. He was cold, mildly dehydrated, and exhausted, but his lungs remained clear. She handed him the inhaler and supervised 2 careful breaths, then offered water in measured sips. "Too much at once will make you sick," she told him. Eli obeyed without argument, though his eyes never left the door. Gideon retrieved the drawing notebook from the backpack and placed it on the floor between them. Eli immediately reached for it. His hands shook as he turned to a blank page. With a blunt pencil from the spiral binding, he drew a vehicle angled down a steep slope. Beside it, he sketched a woman with one leg marked in red. Above the road, he drew a second vehicle and 2 tall figures. One figure stood near the wreck. The other held a square box. "2 men?" Gideon asked. Eli nodded. "Did they take your mother?" The boy shook his head hard. He turned the page and drew Mara pointing through the trees while he ran away with the backpack. Then he drew himself at the ranger station. On the next page, he drew a figure leaving the wreck alone, followed by Mara, climbing upward. "Your mother sent you here," Tessa said. Then she went back. Eli touched the picture of Mara and drew an arrow east, toward the old fencing behind the station. The mobile phone had gained enough charge from the battery pack to start. Tessa opened the emergency files, while Gideon informed Owen that Eli had been found alive. The relief in Owen's response lasted only a moment before procedure returned. He ordered them to remain at the station while the main team approached. The phone contained a damaged audio recording created during the crash. At first, there was only scraping metal and Mara's strained breathing. Then her voice emerged, calm despite the pain. "Eli, take the blue bag. Go to the ranger station. Stay inside. Don't follow anyone unless they know your father's mark." A vehicle engine sounded somewhere above the wreck. Mara lowered her voice. "If I don't come back, find Gideon Vale. Your dad trusted him." Gideon stared at the phone. Caleb's trust felt heavier spoken aloud by the woman who had survived him. Eli opened the back cover of his notebook and removed an old photograph sealed beneath clear tape. It showed 6 Navy SEALs standing beneath a hard overseas sun. Gideon recognized himself, Caleb, and a much younger Knox. On the reverse, Caleb had written the location of Gideon's Wyoming cabin and one sentence: "If you ever need someone who will not quit, find Uncle Gideon." Gideon could not speak for several seconds. Caleb had written the words before the mission that killed him. He had trusted Gideon with a future Gideon never knew existed. Knox suddenly rose. The dog moved through the rear door of the ranger station and followed the fence line east. Gideon clipped on the lead and went with him. 20 yards beyond the building, Knox stopped beside a broken section of wire. A strip of brown canvas hung from one sharp edge, stained dark with dried blood. Eli came to the doorway behind Tessa. When he saw the fabric, color drained from his face. "Mom," he whispered. It was the first word he had spoken since they found him. Gideon crouched beside the cloth without touching it. The bloodstain was significant, but not large enough to prove a fatal injury. Beyond the fence, broken weeds and faint impressions led downhill toward Hollow Creek. Gideon looked at Eli. The boy's eyes were filled with fear, but beneath it was something else: certainty. "Mom went back," Eli said. Thunder rolled over the mountains. And somewhere beyond the eastern trees, Mara Ward was still missing. Thunder moved across the mountains in long, uneven waves, while Owen Mercer's rescue team gathered inside the abandoned ranger station. Rain had not begun, but the air already carried its cold, metallic scent. Eli Ward sat near the old fireplace beneath a silver emergency blanket, one hand wrapped around a cup of warm electrolyte solution and the other resting against Knox's shoulder. The 5-year-old Belgian Malinois remained close without leaning too heavily against the boy, his mahogany body steady beneath the tan tactical vest and his upright ears shifting toward every sound outside. Tessa Monroe had checked Eli twice and confirmed that his breathing was stable, but the 9-year-old still watched the eastern windows as if his mother might appear between the trees at any moment. Gideon Vale stood several feet away, studying the blood-stained piece of brown canvas sealed inside an evidence bag. He recognized the torn fabric from the jacket Mara wore in the photograph Sheriff Rourke had shown him. The stain was dark and dry, but not extensive enough to reveal how badly she had been hurt. That uncertainty was its own kind of pressure. Gideon had spent years imagining the final seconds of people he could no longer save. Now, a living boy was staring at him, waiting for an answer he did not possess. Owen entered from the porch, rain map in one hand and a radio in the other. His broad frame filled the doorway, the burnt orange rescue jacket bright against the dim timber walls. Water-dark clouds had hardened the lines of his weathered square face, and his short brown and gray beard moved slightly as he clenched his jaw. "Main storm cell arrives in 4 hours," he said. "Possibly sooner if the wind shifts. We're evacuating Eli now." The boy immediately tightened his grip on Knox's vest. No, it was only the second full word Gideon had heard from him. Tessa lowered herself beside the chair. "Eli, the road may become unsafe. We need to get you somewhere warm while the others keep looking. You'll leave her." His voice was hoarse from cold and disuse. "No one is leaving your mother," Owen said, but his direct tone sounded like procedure rather than comfort. Eli shook his head and pulled Knox closer. The dog looked toward Gideon. Gideon understood the boy's fear. Adults had already told Eli to run, to wait, and to trust that someone would return. Mara had not returned. A promise made carelessly would be cruel, but silence would feel like abandonment. Gideon crouched until his cold blue-gray eyes were level with Eli's. "I can't promise how this ends," he said. "I can promise I will stay in this search until we know where your mother is." Eli studied Gideon's clean-shaven, angular face, as though searching for a weakness in the statement. Gideon did not soften it with false certainty. "You won't stop?" the boy asked. "No." "Even when it gets dark?" Gideon glanced toward the eastern forest. "Even then." Eli slowly released the vest. From beneath his jacket, he removed a small cloth handkerchief printed with faded yellow leaves. "Mom's," he whispered. Gideon accepted it carefully. Mara's scent might help Knox separate her trail from Eli's. The dog sniffed the handkerchief, then looked east with renewed concentration. Tessa prepared Eli for transport, while Owen selected 2 rescuers to accompany her down the safer western trail. The boy resisted only once, turning back at the porch. Gideon lifted one hand, not a wave, exactly, but an acknowledgement between 2 people bound by the same missing person. Eli nodded and left with Tessa. Knox watched until the blue school jacket disappeared into the trees. Then the dog turned toward Gideon, ready to work. Sheriff Daniel Rourke arrived with a small forensic response team as the search shifted east. One technician, Naomi Voss, was a lean woman in her early 40s with pale olive skin, narrow dark eyes, and straight black hair cut to her chin. She wore a gray waterproof evidence suit beneath a navy field jacket and spoke with the careful restraint of someone who had seen too many investigations damaged by impatience. Naomi had spent 12 years documenting rural accident scenes, where weather could erase evidence faster than human hands. "No one touches the vehicle until I clear it," she said when Owen described the suspected crash site. "That includes former operators, current rescuers, and helpful dogs." Gideon accepted the warning without argument. Knox followed Mara's scent through the broken eastern fence and down a steep line of crushed weeds. The terrain became rougher as the group approached Hollow Creek. Red mineral soil showed beneath exposed roots, turning the mud the same color Lena had found on Eli's button. The dog paused often, working around overlapping scents from deer, rescue personnel, and old hikers. At one point, he lost the track near a rocky ledge. Gideon held the handkerchief near his nose again, without letting him take it. Knox inhaled, moved in a widening circle, and recovered the trail beside a snapped juniper branch. A faint brown thread clung to the wood. The vehicle appeared below them shortly after 2 o'clock. Mara's dark utility wagon had left the old service road, broken through brush, and come to rest nose down between 2 thick pines. One side was crushed, the windshield fractured, and the rear door partly open. No body was visible inside. Rourke secured the area, while Naomi photographed tire marks, damaged vegetation, and the vehicle's final position. Gideon remained outside the perimeter, though every instinct urged him toward the wreck. From where he stood, he could see dried blood on the driver's seat and a child's shoe print in mud near the rear door. 2 people got out, Naomi said after examining the ground. Small prints moving uphill, adult prints beside them for roughly 30 feet. Then the adult trail becomes uneven. She pointed toward a streak on the side panel, likely using the vehicle for support. The pattern matched Eli's drawings. Mara had survived the initial crash and sent her son toward the ranger station. Naomi inspected the wheel wells and undercarriage, while another deputy documented the road above. Several minutes later, she called Rourke closer. "Brake line has a partial cut near the rear assembly. The remaining material appears to have torn under pressure." She did not call it sabotage yet. She collected the damage section and explained that laboratory examination would determine whether a tool had been used. Gideon looked up at the narrow mountain road. Whoever had damaged the line may have expected Mara's vehicle to fail in town, not on a descent above a ravine. Intent did not reduce consequence. Inside the wagon, investigators found a folder of photocopied geological reports, a museum identification card, and a torn envelope bearing the Hollow Creek Resort Development logo. Several pages showed cross-sections of old mining tunnels beneath the proposed construction site. Handwritten notes in Mara's precise script compared archived reports with newer public filings. The older documents warned that abandoned drainage passages could redirect floodwater toward the lower valley. In the public version, those warnings had disappeared. Rourke read one of Mara's notes aloud. Original survey omitted from county submission. Internal correspondence references unacceptable collapse risk. Owen stared at the map. If these tunnels are still open, this storm could fill them. Gideon looked toward the darkening sky. Mara had not simply driven into the mountains to visit him. She had been carrying evidence. Knox suddenly moved away from the vehicle and pulled toward a cluster of rocks below the road. Gideon followed, expecting another section of Mara's trail. Instead, the dog stopped beside a shallow depression and uncovered a small object with one careful paw. It was a brass compass, dented along the rim and missing part of its glass face. Gideon knew it before he picked it up. Kaylee Ward had carried that compass during every deployment. Gideon had watched him scratch the same cross-line symbol into its back beneath a desert sky. For 7 years, Gideon had believed the compass was lost with Caleb's personal effects. Now, it lay in Wyoming mud, halfway between Mara's wrecked vehicle and the forest where she had disappeared. When Gideon opened the lid, a short engraving caught the light. "Bring everyone home." Knox pressed his nose briefly against Gideon's wrist, as though reminding him that Caleb's words were no longer about the dead. Rourke photographed the compass before allowing Gideon to hold it in an evidence sleeve. A memory surfaced. Caleb, sitting against a transport crate, turning the compass in his fingers and saying that a direction meant nothing unless someone was waiting at the end of it. Gideon had dismissed the sentence as another of Caleb's sentimental observations. Now, Mara had carried the compass and a letter meant for him, placing Gideon inside a promise he had spent years avoiding. The evidence in the vehicle revealed more. Museum logs showed that Victor Harlan, security manager for the development company, had visited Mara 3 days earlier. Victor was 44. According to the identification photograph Rourke retrieved, a heavy, solid man with a broad, pale face, small gray-brown eyes and slicked-back black hair thinning at the temples. He dressed in a charcoal industrial security jacket over a black polo and maintained the controlled expression of someone who believed authority depended on never appearing uncertain. Former employees described him as orderly, ambitious, and deeply afraid of losing status. He had requested that Mara return documents allegedly owned by the developer. She refused and scheduled an appointment with Rourke's office for the morning after her disappearance. The audio from Mara's phone contained more than they had first heard. Naomi cleaned part of the recording through her field equipment. After Mara told Eli to run, a male voice sounded near the wreck. "Where's the box?" Another voice, younger and more nervous, said, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Mara demanded that they call an ambulance. The older man told the younger one to search the rear compartment. A door slammed. Then Mara whispered for Eli to keep moving. Rourke's expression hardened. "We find Harlan and whoever was with him." He radioed the county office to locate both company employees and obtain warrants where legally justified. The recording did not prove who cut the brake line, but it confirmed that 2 men had arrived, searched the wreck, and failed to immediately report an injured woman and child. The trail beyond the vehicle told the next part. Knox tracked Mara uphill for nearly a quarter mile. Her footprints were uneven, with deep impressions from the right boot and lighter marks from the left, suggesting a leg injury. Near the road, 2 larger sets of male prints crossed the area, but only Mara's continued east. One male trail approached the forest briefly, then returned to the vehicle. This supported Eli's drawings. The men had taken a box and left, while Mara tried to move after sending her son away. Rain began as a thin mist. Owen checked the time and ordered the team to reduce spacing so no one became separated. The route ended at a slope covered with tangled brush and rusted fencing. Behind it stood a concrete drainage entrance, half concealed by fallen branches. The opening was tall enough for a person to enter while crouched. A faded warning sign identified it as part of an abandoned mining system. Mara's muddy boot prints led directly inside. Male prints stopped near the entrance and turned back. There were no drag marks, no sign she had been carried. She had entered on her own, possibly seeking shelter, a shortcut, or a place to hide if she believed the men might return. Gideon switched on his flashlight and stepped forward, but Owen caught his arm. "Not until we test the air. She's injured. And if there's low oxygen or bad gas, you'll be unconscious before you reach her." The restraint in Owen's voice carried more authority than anger. "You promised the boy you wouldn't stop. Becoming another victim is stopping." The words struck harder because they were true. Gideon looked into the black opening. The old version of him, the one still trapped in unfinished missions, wanted to enter alone and accept whatever followed. But Eli was waiting. Mara needed a rescue, not a sacrifice. Gideon lowered the flashlight. A rescue technician brought forward an air monitor while Owen requested specialized tunnel equipment. Knox stood at the entrance, nose working. He moved from side to side, then pressed his muzzle toward a narrow ventilation crack beside the concrete wall. The dog inhaled repeatedly and gave a low, controlled whine. "Human scent?" Owen asked. Gideon offered Knox Mara's handkerchief again. The dog smelled it, returned to the crack, and held his alert position. "Yes," Gideon said. "Weak, but it's hers." Rourke's deputy brought Mara's phone from the evidence vehicle. A final audio file had appeared after the device completed recovery from its damaged memory. The recording was only 7 seconds long. Mara's breathing sounded labored, and water dripped somewhere nearby. "Eli," she whispered, "if you hear this, I'm underground." The message ended. Rain struck the leaves harder. Beyond the concrete entrance, Hollow Creek's forgotten tunnels waited in darkness, and somewhere inside them, Mara Ward might still be alive. Rain struck the concrete entrance in hard slanting lines, while Owen Mercer turned the abandoned mine opening into a controlled rescue site. Portable lights were positioned beneath waterproof covers, ropes were anchored to mature pines, and a gas monitor rested at the edge of the darkness where Mara Ward's muddy footprints disappeared underground. The first air readings near the entrance were acceptable, but Owen refused to confuse one safe reading with a safe tunnel. Old mines could hold pockets of bad air, unstable flooring, and hidden shafts that swallowed people without warning. Gideon Vale stood beside Knox beneath the trees, water running from his short dark hair and across the angular planes of his clean-shaven face. His complete green digital camouflage uniform was darkened by rain, but he remained upright and controlled, one gloved hand resting near the working line attached to the Belgian Malinois. Knox's mahogany coat had become slick beneath the tan tactical vest. The dog faced the mine, ears upright, nostrils moving whenever the wind pushed air from the narrow ventilation crack. Somewhere inside that mountain, Mara had recorded 7 words and trusted someone would eventually hear them. Gideon heard those words again in his mind. "I'm underground." He wanted to move immediately. Instead, he waited while Owen's team made the rescue possible. Waiting had once felt like cowardice to him. Now it required more discipline than entering the dark. Sheriff Daniel Rourke stood beneath the raised rear door of his county vehicle, using it as shelter while he coordinated the search for Victor Harlan and the unidentified younger man. A deputy had confirmed that Victor was absent from both his home and the Hollow Creek Development Office. His company phone had been switched off less than an hour after Mara's vehicle entered the mountain road. The box taken from the wreck was also missing. "He knows the crash has been found," Rourke said. "If he has any sense, he'll leave the county." Gideon looked toward Mara's damaged wagon above the slope. If he had sense, he would have called an ambulance. Rourke's blue eyes hardened. Men like Harlan don't make the worst decision first. They make one bad choice, then spend the rest of the day protecting it. The sheriff's radio interrupted them. Tessa Monroe's voice came through beneath static. She and the evacuation team were descending the western route with Eli when a dark company utility vehicle passed them going uphill. It carried 2 men. The driver matched Victor's general description. The passenger looked younger and had turned his face away. "Direction?" Rourke asked. "Toward the old service road," Tessa replied. They slowed when they saw us, then accelerated. Rourke immediately ordered deputies to block the main access road and watch the logging tracks. Owen approached, wiping rain from the surface of a folded tunnel map. "If those men come near my rescue site, I need warning before they enter the perimeter." "You'll have it," Rourke said, "but no one abandons the tunnel to chase them." 20 minutes later, Tessa called again. The company vehicle had stopped several miles below the ranger station. The passenger had stepped out, with both hands raised, while Victor drove away alone. A deputy was bringing the man to the command site because he claimed to know why Mara's brakes had failed. The younger man arrived pale and shaking in the back of a patrol vehicle. Cole Danner was 29, with a lean, wiry build and a tired, slightly hollow face. Short, sandy brown hair lay untidily across his forehead. soaked by rain, and light stubble shadowed a jaw that trembled whenever he tried to hold it still. He wore a blue-gray work jacket over a light gray shirt, dark brown work pants, and heavy safety boots. His light brown eyes did not carry the practiced control of Victor's company photograph. They carried exhaustion, guilt, and the fear of a man who had spent 2 days understanding that obedience would not protect him from consequence. Cole worked security maintenance for the development company. His father's long illness had left him buried in medical debt, and Victor had used the promise of overtime and promotion to keep him compliant. None of that excused what he had done, but it explained why he had been vulnerable to the order. Rourke questioned him inside the rescue trailer, while Naomi Voss recorded the interview. Cole did not ask for sympathy. He stared at his wet hands and spoke in short bursts. Victor had told him Mara was holding stolen company records and intended to destroy a lawful project. Cole's task was supposedly simple: damage the vehicle enough that it would not start the following morning, giving Victor time to retrieve the documents through attorneys. "I was supposed to cut a sensor wire," Cole said. "Victor showed me the wrong line, or maybe he knew exactly what he was showing me. I nicked it. He told me it would trigger a warning and keep the car parked." "You cut the brake line," Rourke said. Cole closed his eyes. "Not all the way. I didn't think she would drive. I didn't know she was taking the mountain road." His voice cracked. "When Victor called and said the vehicle had gone over, I told him to call emergency services. He said if we did, they'd inspect the car and both of us would go to prison." Cole had accompanied Victor to the wreck. He was the younger voice on Mara's recording. Victor searched for a gray archival box, while Cole stood frozen near the road. Mara had demanded help, but Victor took the box and ordered Cole back to the vehicle. "She was alive," Cole whispered. "She was looking at me. I left anyway." Gideon watched from outside the open trailer door. Anger rose in him, immediate and physical, but beneath it was a recognition he did not want. Cole had followed a dangerous order because someone above him framed obedience as survival. The situations were not equal. Gideon had not abandoned civilians for money, but the machinery of guilt felt familiar. One decision, then another, until the path behind became more frightening than the one ahead. "Why come back?" Rourke asked. Cole swallowed. The box was almost empty, just copies. Victor said Mara must have hidden the originals in a second bag. The museum boxes have tracking tags, asset protection. He used an old employee login and saw the last signal near the ranger station. Naomi looked up. "A tracker in the archive box?" "In the metal label frame," Cole said. "Low power. It updates when it catches a network connection." Victor believed the real reports, internal letters, and tunnel plans remained either in Mara's wagon or near the station. He had returned to recover them before the police secured the mountain. Rourke ordered the account information verified and dispatched deputies toward the wreck. Cole was placed under arrest but agreed to continue cooperating. Before being moved, he looked at Gideon. "Her son, is he alive?" Gideon held his gaze. "Yes." Relief broke across Cole's face so sharply that it looked painful. "Tell him I'm sorry." "That won't be mine to tell," Gideon said. "And sorry won't remove what happened." Cole nodded. "I know." As deputies led Cole away, Knox suddenly turned from the mine entrance and faced uphill. The dog's ears locked forward. A low growl formed beneath his breath, not directed at the tunnel, but at the old ventilation channel running through the slope. Gideon followed Knox to a rusted metal grate half hidden by brush. Through it came the faint vibration of an engine operating somewhere above the mine. Then Knox drew in a second scent, stiffened, and looked toward Mara's handkerchief in Gideon's pocket before returning his nose to the grate. The same moving air carried two trails at once: fuel and the woman trapped below. For a moment, the man hunting the evidence and the woman he had abandoned were connected by the same forgotten passage. Gideon understood what Knox had revealed. Victor was not merely approaching the wreck. He was moving directly above the chamber where Mara might be trapped. Owen examined the old plan. A narrow maintenance road crossed the tunnel system near a collapsed ventilation shaft. If Victor searched Mara's wagon from that side, movement or falling debris could worsen the instability below. Rourke took two deputies uphill, while Gideon remained at the mine despite every instinct to join the pursuit. "Your place is here," Owen reminded him. Gideon looked at Knox. The dog had already returned his attention to the opening. Mara was the mission. Victor was the sheriff's responsibility. The confrontation above lasted less than 5 minutes. Victor reached the wreck, climbed through the damaged rear door, and found a brown canvas document bag wedged beneath the folded seat. Rourke approached from the road while 2 deputies moved from the trees. Victor tried to run downhill with the bag but slipped in the red mud. He shoved one deputy, reached toward his jacket, and froze when 3 commands struck him at once. There was no heroic fight, no long chase through the forest. Victor Harlan ended face down beside the vehicle he had helped send over the slope, his black work trousers soaked with mud and his controlled expression finally broken by panic. Inside the bag, Rourke found the original geological survey, internal company correspondence, and a folded map of the abandoned Hollow Creek mine. The correspondence showed that executives had known for months that several underground chambers were unstable. Victor had been instructed to contain records exposure, though nothing in writing explicitly ordered sabotage. His own choices had transformed corporate concealment into personal crime. Owen spread the recovered tunnel plan beneath a clear protective sheet. The mine consisted of a primary drainage corridor, 2 maintenance branches, and a lower valve chamber built to control runoff during the site's active years. A collapse had sealed part of the lower level decades earlier, but a narrow service opening remained. Mara may have entered the main corridor to shelter, Owen said, tracing the route. If part of the floor failed, she could have dropped into this chamber. Gideon studied the handwritten marks along one branch. Mara had circled several passages in pencil. Near the lower chamber, she had drawn Caleb's crossed-line symbol. She marked where she was going, Gideon said. Or where she fell, Owen replied. The plan also showed why Knox's scent alert had come through the wall rather than the entrance. The valve chamber connected to the exterior ventilation crack by a narrow duct. Air from below carried Mara's scent outward. It also meant she was deeper than they had hoped. A rescue technician lowered a remote camera into the first corridor, but lost visibility where the passage narrowed behind broken supports. Water was already running along the floor. Owen redirected a pump hose and ordered the confined space team into harnesses. They needed proof of Mara's exact location before committing rescuers to the lower chamber. Gideon led Knox only as far as the secured section of the entrance. The dog moved carefully across the wet concrete, stopped above a rusted floor plate, and began pawing at one edge. Owen raised a hand, and every nearby engine was shut down. The portable pump went silent. Radios were lowered. Even the rain seemed to recede beneath the concrete roof. At first, Gideon heard nothing. Then came a faint metallic tap from below. A pause. A second tap. Another pause. A third. 3 short knocks, evenly spaced. Gideon's chest tightened. Caleb had used the same signal during the final mission after part of the structure collapsed. 3 knocks meant survivors below. Owen crouched beside the plate. Again, he shouted into the darkness. For several seconds, there was only dripping water. Then the 3 knocks returned, weaker, but unmistakable. Mara Ward was alive. The discovery moved through the rescue site without celebration. Relief had no time to settle. Water began slipping through cracks around the floor plate, first in thin threads, then in a shallow moving sheet. One technician checked the creek gauge and called out that runoff was rising faster than predicted. Owen looked at the tunnel plan, then at his watch. If this map is accurate, the lower chamber begins flooding when the creek reaches the upper spillway, he calculated silently. We may have 90 minutes. Gideon knelt beside Knox. The Malinois pressed his nose to the wet metal, holding himself perfectly still over Mara's position. Gideon placed one hand on the dog's vest and listened to the water gathering beneath them. For 7 years, 3 knocks had belonged to a memory he could not change. Now they belonged to someone who could still be brought home. The 90-minute estimate became 78 before Owen Mercer allowed the first rescue team to enter the Hollow Creek mine. Water had begun sliding beneath the rusted floor plate in a continuous sheet, carrying red soil and pine needles into the black corridor. Owen stood beneath the temporary shelter, with the recovered tunnel map spread across a waterproof board, his broad shoulders rigid inside the burnt-orange rescue jacket. Rain struck the canvas above him with enough force to drown ordinary conversation, so every instruction was repeated through radios and confirmed aloud. No one entered without a harness. No one moved beyond the marked line without checking the air. 2 rescuers would remain outside for every person sent underground. Gideon Vale watched the preparations without interfering. His green digital camouflage uniform was soaked beneath a fitted rescue harness, and a waterproof headlamp had been secured above his neat, dark undercut. He carried no weapon, only a radio, emergency blanket, medical pouch, and the long working line attached to Knox. The Belgian Malinois stood beside him, lean mahogany body tense beneath the tan tactical vest, black facial mask pointed toward the mine. Knox had been trained to enter damaged structures, but this tunnel contained moving water, unstable metal, and air passages too narrow for a human to follow. Gideon placed a hand against the dog's shoulder. "We find her," he said. "We don't become another problem." The words were meant for both of them. Lena Hart had returned from the lower trail after confirming Eli was safely transferred to a county emergency vehicle. Her dark blonde hair was wet around the edges of her low ponytail, and rain had darkened her red rescue jacket. She knelt to examine Knox's paws, checking the earlier abrasion and fitting flexible protective boots over all 4 feet. "These won't make him invincible," she warned. "Sharp metal can still cut through." Gideon nodded. Lena looked up at his angular face and cold blue-gray eyes. "The same applies to you." Gideon almost dismissed the remark, but stopped himself. Understood. It was a small answer, yet Lena recognized the difference. Months earlier, he would have treated concern as an intrusion. Now he accepted it as information. Owen assigned Gideon and Knox to the first approach team because the dog could identify the strongest airflow carrying Mara's scent. They would be accompanied by Marcus Bell, a 43-year-old confined space rescue technician with a narrow, weathered face, close-cropped reddish-brown hair, and a short beard streaked with gray. Marcus wore a yellow, waterproof rescue suit, climbing harness, and black helmet fitted with a camera. He had spent nearly 2 decades entering collapsed wells, industrial tanks, and mountain caves. A mining accident had killed his older brother when Marcus was 19, leaving him with no tolerance for careless heroics. "I don't care what you did overseas," Marcus told Gideon as he checked the rope connection. "Down there, the line decides how far you go." Gideon met his eyes. "Then we follow the line." Marcus gave one approving nod. The first corridor sloped gradually downward. Water covered the floor to Gideon's ankles, cold enough to numb his boots within minutes. Concrete walls narrowed around old pipes that groaned whenever runoff surged through hidden channels. Marcus tested the air every 20 feet and marked safe sections with reflective tape. Behind them, the rope ran back toward daylight. Knox moved carefully, protected paws testing each surface before committing his weight. He ignored rust, standing water, and the lingering scent of rescuers. Whenever Gideon presented Mara's yellow-leaf handkerchief, the dog turned toward a low branch of the tunnel where air flowed through broken supports. The deeper they traveled, the more the mine changed inside Gideon's mind. Water striking metal became distant rifle fire. A collapsing pipe sounded like a door blown inward. His headlamp illuminated wet concrete, but memory placed him inside a ruined building beneath a desert night. He heard Caleb's final transmission beneath the static of the radio. "East wall." Gideon's breathing shortened. The rope around his waist felt like debris pinning him down. He stopped walking. Marcus noticed immediately. "Vale?" Gideon did not answer. The corridor seemed to tilt. 4 figures waited behind dust where the light could not reach. Knox turned back. The dog stepped close and pressed his muzzle firmly into Gideon's gloved palm. When Gideon failed to respond, Knox sat directly in front of him and held eye contact. The behavior had been trained after Gideon's first severe episode following retirement. Interrupt, anchor, and wait. Gideon focused on the dark amber eyes. He felt the dog's warm breath through the glove. "Name," Marcus said over the radio, his voice controlled rather than alarmed. "Gideon Vale." Location: Hollow Creek, Wyoming. Mission: Gideon looked beyond Knox toward the flooded passage. Find Mara Ward. The desert walls receded. Water became water again. Knox rose but did not continue forward. Instead, he moved to the left wall and placed one paw against a section of corroded pipe. Then he looked back at Gideon and released 3 soft breaths through his nose. Pause, pause, pause. At that exact moment, 3 faint knocks answered from somewhere beyond the wall. Gideon knew Knox had not created the signal. The dog had felt the vibration through the metal before human ears could detect it. Still, the timing stopped him. Years earlier, Caleb had carved "Bring everyone home" into a compass and taught Mara 3 knocks as a simple emergency signal. Now the dog Caleb once helped train had found the line carrying her answer through the mountain. Gideon pressed his hand to the pipe. "We hear you!" he shouted. 2 weak knocks followed, then one more. Mara was no longer only somewhere below. She was close enough to hear them. Marcus radioed the signal to Owen. The map showed a narrow ventilation duct behind the wall leading toward the lower valve chamber. The main corridor continued another 50 feet before reaching a partially collapsed access shaft. Owen instructed them to advance only to the camera point. "No one enters the lower chamber until we see the floor and support conditions," he said. Gideon heard the urgency beneath the discipline. The creak gauge had risen again. At the collapsed access point, broken beams and stone blocked most of the passage. A gap near the floor measured barely wide enough for the flexible camera. Marcus fed the lens through while Gideon held the cable above the water. The screen first showed darkness, then a tilted metal platform. A woman lay against the far wall, one leg trapped beneath a fallen support beam. Her brown canvas jacket was torn and stained, chestnut hair loose from its low ponytail and clinging to her pale, freckled face. Mara Ward appeared thinner than in the museum photograph, her hazel green eyes half closed from exhaustion. Water covered the chamber floor and had reached her hips. One hand held a metal tool she had used to strike the pipe. "Mara," Marcus called through the camera microphone. "County Rescue, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. "Ellie? He's alive and safe," Gideon answered. Mara closed her eyes again, and the relief across her face looked almost like pain. "Thank God." The initial opening was too small for the rescue litter or lifting equipment. Owen ordered a second team to begin stabilizing the upper section, while Marcus enlarged the gap with compact hydraulic tools. Every vibration risked shifting the beam on Mara's leg, so progress came slowly. The water did not share their patience. It rose another inch while they worked. Gideon was the only member of the approach team narrow enough through the shoulders to pass the first opening once loose edges were removed. Marcus objected until Owen confirmed the plan. Gideon would enter attached to 2 lines, assess Mara, provide insulation, and position a communication cable. He would not attempt to lift the beam. Gideon removed Knox's lead and handed it to Marcus. The dog resisted, trying to follow him toward the gap. "Stay," Gideon ordered. Knox stood rigid, ears forward. Gideon held his gaze. "I'm coming back." Only then did the dog sit. The opening scraped Gideon's shoulders as he crawled through. Cold water closed around his forearms and chest before the chamber widened enough for him to stand in a crouch. Mara watched him approach with wary, exhausted attention. At 35, she retained the slender, balanced build visible in her photograph, though exposure and pain had hollowed her features. Light freckles crossed her nose beneath mud and blood. Her brown canvas jacket, blue-gray shirt, and dark jeans were soaked. Her left leg lay twisted beneath the beam, but her foot still had color. "Gideon Vale?" she asked. "Yes. Caleb said you'd look exactly like you were waiting for someone to give an order." Despite the cold, the corner of her mouth moved. Gideon knelt beside her and wrapped the emergency blanket around her shoulders. "He talked about me? More than you deserved." The answer carried affection rather than accusation. Gideon checked her pulse and asked simple questions to assess awareness. Mara had entered the tunnel to hide when she heard Victor's vehicle return above the wreck. She followed old survey markings, hoping to reach an eastern service exit, but part of the floor collapsed beneath her. The support beam fell across her leg. She had been trapped for more than a day, surviving on rainwater dripping through the duct and conserving the battery in her phone. 3 knocks, Gideon said. "Caleb taught you?" "He said if the world ever buried him, he wanted me to know how to answer." Her gaze moved to Gideon's face. "He didn't blame you." Gideon looked away. "You don't know what happened. I know what he wrote." Before Gideon could ask, water surged through a lower grate and rose around their waists. Owen's voice came through the cable. "Approach team. Runoff spike. We are accelerating extraction." The second team widened the opening enough to pass an inflatable lifting bag and compact support braces. Marcus crawled into the chamber with another rescuer while Owen directed from outside. They positioned braces on both sides of the fallen beam, then slid the lifting bag beneath its strongest point. Gideon kept Mara talking, while Marcus checked the trapped leg. A grinding sound moved through the ceiling. Dust fell. Knocks barked from the upper corridor, one sharp warning. Marcus looked up just before a rusted bracket broke loose. Gideon covered Mara's head and shoulders. The metal struck his upper arm, sending pain across his shoulder, but the beam trapping Mara did not move. "You're hit," Mara said, still working. "That isn't the same as being fine." The words sounded like something Lena might have said. Gideon almost laughed, but Owen ordered the lift to begin. The bag expanded. The beam rose less than an inch, then two. Marcus pulled Mara's leg free, while the second rescuer secured it in a rigid splint. She cried out once, then bit down on the blanket. Gideon did not tell her to be strong. She already was. The rescue litter came through the enlarged opening. Mara was strapped in and moved toward the corridor as water reached Gideon's ribs. Gideon tried to push from behind with his injured arm, but Marcus stopped him. "Use the line. Let the team carry the load." Gideon's instinct screamed that releasing control meant risking another death. Then he saw 6 rescuers distributed along the rope, each holding one part of the weight. This was not his old mission. He was not alone. Knox waited at the junction and barked at measured intervals, guiding the team through dust and the roar of water. When the lights flickered, the dog's voice became the fixed point, leading them upward. The last rescuer cleared the chamber moments before muddy runoff flooded the opening and submerged the platform where Mara had been trapped. Outside, emergency crews received the litter beneath the storm shelter. Eli had been brought to the secure medical area after Tessa confirmed it was safe. The boy ran forward but stopped when instructed so paramedics could work. Mara lifted one shaking hand. Eli took it, pressing his face against her fingers. Knox stood between the litter and Gideon, wet coat shining under the lights. Mara looked past the dog. "There's something in my inside pocket." A medic removed the dented compass, and a sealed letter protected in plastic. Mara held both toward Gideon. "Caleb left these for you." Gideon stepped back. "This isn't the time." "It's why I came." Eli released his mother's hand long enough to cross the short distance and wrap both arms around Gideon's waist. The unexpected contact froze him. Then Knox leaned against his leg, and Gideon slowly placed one hand on the boy's back. After Mara was loaded into the ambulance, Gideon opened the letter beneath the rescue lights. His hands shook more than they had inside the flooded chamber. The first line read, "If you are reading this, then you are still alive. Please do not turn that into a punishment." Gideon lowered the page. Years of discipline, guilt, and carefully managed silence broke at once. He bowed his head, unable to hide the tears moving down his face. Knox pressed his head against Gideon's chest. This time, Gideon did not turn away. 3 weeks after the Hollow Creek rescue, Gideon Vale stood outside the county hospital with Caleb Ward's letter folded inside the breast pocket of his green digital camouflage uniform. The paper had softened along the creases because he had opened it so many times, yet he still had not read the final paragraph. His injured shoulder remained stiff beneath the fabric, and a narrow strip of medical tape crossed the bruised skin where the rusted bracket had struck him. The doctor had called it a deep contusion with a minor muscle strain. Gideon called it irrelevant, though he had followed the rehabilitation instructions more carefully than he admitted. Knox waited beside him on the sidewalk, the 5-year-old Belgian Malinois standing alert in his tan tactical vest, deep mahogany coat bright under the cold morning sun. The abrasion on the dog's rear paw had healed. His dark amber eyes moved between the hospital entrance and Gideon's face, patient but watchful. Gideon had driven 40 minutes to visit Mara Ward, parked in the farthest corner of the lot, and spent another 18 minutes convincing himself to enter. He had gone through flooded tunnels with less hesitation. "This is different," he said quietly. Knox tilted one upright ear. Gideon looked at the glass doors. "I know." Mara occupied a rehabilitation room overlooking a row of bare cottonwood trees. Surgery had repaired the damage to her left leg, but she still wore a rigid brace and required crutches. She sat beside the window in the same light blue-gray shirt she had worn beneath the canvas jacket, though the damaged jacket itself had been taken as evidence. Her shoulder-length chestnut hair was again tied in a low ponytail, and color had begun to return to her fair, lightly freckled face. The hazel-green eyes that had looked exhausted inside the mine were clearer now. though pain and interrupted sleep still showed beneath them. Mara was slender, composed, and stronger than her appearance first suggested. Years of raising Eli alone after Caleb's death had taught her to carry grief without allowing it to control the room. Eli sat on the floor beside her bed, drawing knocks from memory. His blue school jacket had been cleaned, but the missing section of the sleeve remained unrepaired because he refused to let anyone replace it. To him, the torn fabric was proof that the path he left had worked. When Gideon appeared in the doorway, Mara looked up without surprise. "You took long enough. I wasn't sure visitors were allowed. You asked the nurse twice." Gideon glanced toward the hall. Mara smiled faintly. "She told me." Eli rose immediately and crossed to Knox. The boy had regained some color, though his large blue-gray eyes still watched unfamiliar sounds with caution. He crouched beside the Belgian Malinois and placed one small hand against the dog's vest. Knox remained steady, lowering his head just enough for Eli to touch the black fur along his muzzle. Gideon noticed the boy breathing in time with the dog. Tessa had taught him the exercise after the rescue. Knox had adopted it without instruction. Mara nodded toward the chair beside the bed. "Sit down, Gideon." He chose the chair with its back against the wall. Mara noticed but did not comment. For several moments, none of them spoke. Gideon had imagined this meeting many times, but every version contained accusations. Mara would ask why Caleb died. Eli would look at him as if he had failed twice, once overseas and once by taking so long to find them. Instead, Mara asked, "Did you read the letter?" "Most of it." "Most?" I stopped before the end. "Why?" Gideon's hand moved unconsciously toward his pocket. "Because the beginning was enough." Mara studied him. Caleb wrote that letter 6 months before his last deployment. He didn't write it because he expected to die. He wrote letters to everyone whenever he was afraid he might forget to say something important. Her voice remained gentle but firm. "He left one for me, one for Eli before Eli was even born, and one for you. He should have written to someone else. He chose you." Gideon looked away. Beyond the window, wind moved through the empty branches. "That was his mistake." "No," Mara said. "Your mistake was deciding his trust meant you had to suffer forever." The words entered the room without anger, which made them harder to resist. Mara told him what Caleb had written about the final mission. The intelligence had been incomplete, and Gideon had challenged the order twice. Caleb and the others had agreed to continue because civilians were believed to be inside the structure. Gideon had not forced them forward. After the explosion, he had pulled 2 wounded operators and an interpreter through a collapsed corridor before returning for Caleb. Gideon remembered only the wall he could not cross. Caleb had remembered the people Gideon brought out. "You built your whole life around the moment you failed," Mara said. Caleb remembered the moments you didn't. Gideon's jaw tightened. "He still died." "Yes." Pain crossed Mara's face, but she did not retreat from it. "And I still wake up wishing he hadn't. But loving him does not require me to punish everyone who survived." Eli looked up from Knox. The boy said nothing, but Gideon felt the truth of Mara's words settle across all 3 of them. The legal consequences unfolded beyond the hospital walls. Victor Harlan remained in county custody, charged with evidence theft, obstruction, leaving injured people without aid, and involvement in the sabotage of Mara's vehicle. Additional charges depended on laboratory findings and the company records recovered from Hollow Creek. Cole Danner faced prosecution for damaging the brake line, though his immediate cooperation, confession, and assistance in locating Victor would be considered by the court. Sheriff Daniel Rourke refused to promise leniency. "Regret mattered," he said, but regret did not erase danger. The development company suspended the Hollow Creek Resort project after investigators confirmed that geological warnings had been removed from the public filing. State inspectors sealed the abandoned mine entrances, and engineers began examining whether runoff from the tunnel system threatened homes in the lower valley. The county museum prepared an exhibition explaining the mining site's history and Mara's discovery. She insisted that the exhibit focus on the workers and families who had lived with the land's hidden risks, not on her own rescue. Gideon visited Mara and Eli twice more before she left the hospital. He never stayed long, but each visit became easier. Their connection did not turn into sudden romance. Mara still wore Caleb's wedding ring on a chain beneath her shirt, and Gideon understood that grief did not create a vacancy someone else was expected to fill. What formed between them was quieter, trust without obligation, shared memory without accusation, and the beginning of a friendship neither needed to name. On Mara's final morning at the hospital, Eli handed Gideon a folded drawing. It showed the abandoned watchtower, Gideon standing beneath it, and Knox facing the forest. Behind them were 5 faint human figures drawn in gray pencil. Gideon recognized the number immediately, the 4 teammates lost in the explosion, and Caleb beside them. But Eli had drawn the figures facing away, walking toward a sunrise instead of reaching for Gideon. At the bottom of the page, in careful, uneven letters, the boy had written, "They know you came back." Gideon stared at the drawing until the room blurred. Eli could not have known the exact shape of Gideon's nightmares. Perhaps it was only a child's interpretation of the stories he had heard. Perhaps faith sometimes worked through coincidence because human beings would reject anything more direct. Knox moved beside Gideon and pressed his head against the man's hand. For the first time, the figures in Gideon's memory did not look trapped. By early winter, Mara and Eli had returned to their small rented house near town. Mara attended physical therapy 3 times a week and gradually moved from 2 crutches to 1. Eli resumed school. He remained quiet and sometimes froze when metal struck metal, but he no longer hid from the sound. Tessa taught him grounding techniques, and Lena arranged for Knox to visit the school during one counseling session. The Belgian Malinois lay beside Eli's chair while the boy described the ranger station to a therapist. Each time his breathing shortened, Knox raised his head, and Eli found the rhythm again. Owen Mercer invited Gideon to the search and rescue equipment yard one Saturday. "We need someone to inspect rope systems," he said. "Not lead a team, not make speeches, inspect equipment." Gideon understood the offer had been deliberately made, small enough to accept. He spent 3 hours checking carabiners, replacing damaged webbing and reorganizing medical cases. The following week, he returned without being asked. A month later, Owen placed him beside a group of new volunteers and told him to demonstrate movement with a working dog. Gideon began to object, then saw Knox waiting at his side. "Fine," he said. "One demonstration." The demonstration became a regular training session. Gideon taught volunteers to read a dog's change in posture, protect scent areas, and avoid flooding a search zone with unnecessary movement. He was strict, but never humiliating. When one nervous volunteer made a mistake, Gideon corrected the technique instead of attacking the person. Owen watched from a distance and recognized that Gideon was not merely teaching search skills, he was becoming the leader he believed he no longer deserved to be. Sheriff Rourke also introduced Gideon to a small veterans support group meeting in the basement of the county library. Gideon attended once and sat near the exit without speaking. The second week, he returned. During the 4th meeting, he said Caleb's name aloud. No one offered easy forgiveness. No one told him to move on. They listened, which was more useful. Lena continued visiting the cabin to check Knox. She arrived one afternoon carrying coffee and found the front door unlocked. Gideon had not noticed until she mentioned it. The framed photograph of his SEAL team now stood upright on the shelf. Beside it rested Eli's drawing and Caleb's dented compass. "The place looks different," Lena said. "It's the same cabin." "That isn't what I meant." Gideon poured 2 cups of coffee. This time, he invited her to sit before she had to ask. The cabin did not become crowded, but signs of other lives appeared. Eli left colored pencils on the kitchen table. Mara placed a restored copy of the old Hollow Creek survey beside Gideon's maps. Owen stored spare rescue equipment in the shed. Knox moved through the rooms without constantly checking whether Gideon was behind him. One clear morning near the end of winter, Gideon prepared for the first official training exercise of the new mountain search unit. He reached for Caleb's compass and found the shelf empty. His body stiffened out of old habit. Before he could begin searching, Knox entered from the porch with the compass held carefully between his teeth. The dog placed it at Gideon's boots and turned toward the abandoned watchtower. "Stealing evidence now?" Gideon asked. Knox's ears remained upright. He looked toward the tower again. Gideon clipped the compass to his plain black belt and followed. The wooden stairs groaned beneath his combat boots as he climbed with Knox close behind. From the platform, the valley opened in every direction. dark pines, snow along the ridges, and the narrow road leading toward town. Below, Owen arranged volunteers into teams. Lena checked the medical vehicle. Tessa spoke with Eli beside a table of maps. Mara stood with one crutch, chestnut hair moving in the wind, watching her son give Knox's practice scent cloth to a trainee. Years earlier, Gideon would have used the height to identify threats, exits, and approaching vehicles. Now he saw people depending on one another. He rested his hand against Knox's neck. The Belgian Malinois stood alert and steady, facing the same direction, exactly as he had during missions overseas and every difficult day afterward. "We brought them home," Gideon said. Knox leaned slightly against his leg. Gideon looked at Mara, Eli, Lena, Owen, and the volunteers below. Then he opened Caleb's compass. The needle trembled once and settled north. "And they brought us back." The team below called for him. This time, Gideon did not remain above them. He descended the tower with Knox at his side, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer decided where he was allowed to go. Sometimes, a miracle does not arrive with thunder, bright light, or an answer we immediately understand. Sometimes, God sends it quietly through a loyal dog that refuses to stop searching, a child brave enough to leave a trail, or a stranger who appears when we have almost lost the strength to continue. Gideon believed his past had taken away every reason to live. But God did not erase his scars. Instead, he used those scars to guide Gideon toward people who needed the courage, compassion, and love still hidden inside him. Knox did not simply lead Gideon to Mara and Eli. He led a wounded man back to faith, purpose, and the life he thought he no longer deserved. The same can be true in our everyday lives. We may not always recognize the small signs placed in front of us. A phone call, an unexpected friendship, a helping hand, or even the quiet presence of an animal may become the beginning of a miracle. What seems ordinary today may be God's way of reminding us that we are still needed, still loved, and never truly forgotten. So when life feels heavy, do not assume that your story is over. The road ahead may still hold people who need your kindness, a purpose waiting for your courage, and blessings that have not yet found their way to your door. Keep your heart open. Sometimes, the miracle is already beside you, patiently waiting for you to notice. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you the most, and let us know where you are watching from. Subscribe to Navy SEAL and K9 Stories so you can join us for more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and second chances. May God bless you and your family, protect you through every difficult season, bring peace to your heart, and remind you that no matter how lost you may feel, you are never beyond His reach.